Across continents, across centuries, across cultures that never met, humans have told remarkably similar stories, built similar symbols, asked the same impossible questions. Welcome to Between Worlds. Let's explore where history, belief, and human imagination meet. Before you step into someone else's home, you probably pause. You knock. You wait to be invited in. Perhaps you wipe your feet. Perhaps you remove your shoes. Perhaps you say a quiet hello before crossing the doorway. These are such ordinary actions, but we rarely stop to ask why we do them. After all, it's only a door, a few pieces of wood, a metal handle, a frame built into a wall. And yet, for thousands of years, people across the world have treated this ordinary space as anything but ordinary. They have nailed horseshoes above it, buried coins beneath it, painted symbols around it, hung charms from it, whispered prayers before crossing it. In Jewish homes, a mezuzah is fixed to the doorpost. In many Hindu homes, intricate rangoli patterns welcome visitors at the entrance. Across Japan, people leave their shoes behind before stepping inside. Throughout Europe, iron, salt, herbs, and blessed branches were placed near doorways to keep unseen dangers outside. The traditions are different, the religions are different, the continents are different. Yet somehow, they all arrived at the same conclusion. A doorway matters, not because of the wood or the stone or the craftsmanship, but because of what it represents. A doorway is one of the few places in our lives that is neither one thing nor another. It is not inside, it's not outside, it is a space between, and throughout history, human beings have believed that the spaces between worlds are never ordinary. Because something strange happens whenever we cross a threshold. We leave one place behind before we fully arrive in the next. There is a brief moment where we belong to neither. That moment may last only a second, but cultures across history treated it with extraordinary respect. Perhaps because they believed that transitions were powerful, or perhaps because without even realizing it, we still do. Tonight, we are stepping into one of humanity's oldest ideas. Not that buildings can become sacred, but that crossing can. Because long before anthropologists gave it a name, people everywhere understood something remarkably similar. The world is full of boundaries day and night, land and sea, childhood and adulthood, life and death. And wherever one world becomes another, humans have always sensed that something important happens in between. Imagine you're standing in a doorway. One foot is still inside your home, the other has already stepped into the street. For a brief moment, you're in neither place completely. You haven't fully left, you haven't fully arrived. It seems insignificant, yet human beings have always paid remarkable attention to moments exactly like this. Not just doorways, but dawn and dusk, the changing of the seasons, the first day of the new year, the moment before a wedding, the hours between death and burial. Across cultures, these aren't treated as ordinary moments. They are marked with rituals, songs, prayers, offerings, because they all share one thing in common: their transitions. Anthropologists have a word for this state: liminality. The word comes from the Latin limen, meaning threshold. It describes the experience of standing between two states, neither what you were nor yet what you're about to become. The concept became famous through the work of anthropologists like Arnold van Gennep and Victor Turner, who noticed something remarkable while studying cultures around the world. The details of each society were different, but the pattern kept repeating. Whenever people crossed an important boundary, they created rituals: a child becoming an adult, a stranger becoming family through marriage, an ordinary person becoming a king, the living becoming one of the ancestors. Every transformation had an in between stage, a period where the old identity had ended but the new one had not yet fully begun. And that in between state was rarely treated as ordinary. It was often considered the most powerful part of the journey, because transformation doesn't happen at the beginning or at the end, it happens in the crossing. Perhaps that's why thresholds became sacred long before anyone wrote philosophy about them. People instinctively understood that boundaries mattered. The edge of a forest felt different from its center. The shoreline felt different from open sea. A mountain pass, the mouth of a cave, a bridge over a river, all became places where stories gathered, places where spirits appeared, where bargains were struck, where heroes were tested. A doorway belongs to the same family of places. Architecturally, it's just an opening in a wall. Symbolically, it's where one world ends and another begins. And once you begin looking for thresholds, you realize our lives are built around them. We celebrate the first day of school. We count down to midnight on New Year's Eve. We gather for weddings, graduations, funerals, housewarmings, all ceremonies that mark a crossing from one chapter of life to another. The event itself matters, but what we are really celebrating is the threshold, the moment someone steps out of one identity and into another. Perhaps that explains why the doorway became sacred. It was never just about entering a building, it was a daily reminder that every journey, no matter how ordinary, begins by crossing from one world into the next. Once you begin looking for sacred doorways, you start seeing them everywhere, not because cultures copied one another, but because they kept arriving at the same conclusion. If a threshold is where the worlds meet, then it is also where worlds can cross, and that makes it a place worth protecting. In ancient Rome, there was even a god whose entire purpose was to watch over beginnings and endings. His name was Janus. He was unlike any other Roman god. He had two faces. One looked backward, the other looked ahead. One watched where you had come from, the other watched where you were going. He presided over gates, doorways, city entrances, journeys. Even the first month of the year, January, still bears his name. To the Romans, every beginning was also an ending, every entrance an exit, every threshold a reminder that life is always moving between one state and another. Thousands of kilometers away, people express the same idea differently. In Jewish homes, a mezuzah is fixed to the doorpost. Inside it is a handwritten passage from the Torah. As people enter or leave, many touch it gently. Some kiss their fingers afterward. The doorway becomes more than an entrance. It becomes a quiet reminder of faith, identity, and the home they are about to enter or leave. Across India, another tradition appears. Before festivals, weddings, or the arrival of guests, families decorate their thresholds with rangoli. Delicate patterns bloom across the ground in colored powders, rice flour, or flower petals. They welcome prosperity, honor the divine, and transform an ordinary entrance into a place of blessing. In Japan, the transition begins before the doorway is even crossed. Shoes are removed at the entrance of a home. It is often explained as cleanliness, and it is, but it is also symbolic. The dust and concerns of the outside world remain outside. Crossing the threshold isn't simply changing location, it's changing the kind of space you inhabit. Across much of Europe, people hung horseshoes above doors, placed iron nails beneath thresholds, sprinkled salt across entrances, or tucked herbs like rowan and St. John's wort beside the frame. The objects themselves varied, the purpose rarely did. Keep harm outside, allow blessings inside. Even folklore reflected this belief. Across many European traditions, vampires, witches, and certain restless spirits could not simply enter a home. They needed permission. The doorway wasn't merely an opening, it was a boundary, a line that even the supernatural was expected to respect. The details differ from culture to culture, but the pattern is astonishingly consistent. The threshold is never treated as empty space. It is watched, marked, blessed, and protected. Not because wood or stone possess magical qualities, but because the act of crossing has always carried meaning. A house is where a family begins and ends each day, where children are welcomed home, where strangers become guests, where a bride enters for the first time, where one day a coffin may leave for the last. So many of life's most important moments pass through a doorway. Perhaps that is why people across history refuse to leave it unmarked. Not every culture agreed about what lived beyond the threshold, but almost every culture agreed that the threshold itself deserved respect. Imagine you've had the worst day of your life. Nothing has gone right. Work was exhausting. The traffic was unbearable. Your phone hasn't stopped ringing. Your mind is still carrying the weight of everything that happened. Then you reach your front door. You unlock it, step inside, close it behind you. Nothing about you has physically changed, and yet, almost instantly, something feels different. The world outside is still there. Your problems haven't disappeared, but your body knows you've crossed into another space. That feeling isn't imaginary. Our brains are remarkably sensitive to boundaries. Long before humans built houses, we learned to notice transitions in the landscape. The place where open grassland suddenly became dense trees, the bank of a river. These boundaries mattered. They often marked changes in safety, in visibility, in the animals you might encounter. Even today, our attention naturally sharpens when we cross from one environment into another. A doorway is an architectural boundary, but our brains respond to it in much the same way. It tells us the rules are changing. Outside, you may be a stranger, but inside, you're family. Outside, you're expected to perform. Inside, you can finally rest. Outside, your voice carries differently. Inside, you whisper. A single step changes not just where you are, but how you're expected to behave. Perhaps that's why so many cultures pause at the threshold. Not because the doorway itself possesses power, but because it creates a moment of awareness, a brief pause between identities. Think about how many versions of yourself exist. You're one person with your closest friends, another at work, another with your parents, another entirely when you're alone. We move between these identities so effortlessly that we rarely notice the transition, but almost every one of them begins with a threshold: the office entrance, the classroom door, the hospital corridor, the temple gate, the front door of your home. Each crossing quietly asks the same question: who are you about to become? Perhaps this is why so many important ceremonies begin with crossing. A bride steps across the entrance into a new home. A graduate walks across a stage. Pilgrims pass through the temple gates. Mourners follow a coffin through the cemetery gates. Even birth begins with crossing from one world into another. The threshold doesn't create the transformation, it marks it. It gives the invisible a visible shape. Maybe that's what humans have always needed. Not because change is impossible without ritual, but because change is difficult to feel. A doorway gives us something tangible: a single step, a single moment, a single crossing that tells our minds something is different now. Perhaps that's why, after thousands of years, we still hesitate for just a fraction of a second before stepping through certain doors. A courtroom, a hospital room, a childhood home we haven't visited in years. We know the doorway itself isn't magical, and yet crossing it can feel like crossing into another version of our lives. Because sometimes the smallest distance we ever travel is the step between who we were and who we are about to become. For most of human history, crossing a doorway was never just practical, it was ceremonial. Not always in a grand or religious sense. Often the ceremony lasted only a moment. A hand touching a door frame, a whispered blessing, a pair of shoes left neatly at the entrance, a brief pause before stepping inside. These small rituals did something profound. They acknowledged that life is made of transitions, that where you have been is not the same as where you're going. Modern life rarely gives us those moments. We rush from the street into the house while checking our phones. We leave work mentally hours after we have walked through the front door. We answer emails from our beds, attend meetings from our kitchens, carry the outside world into every room of the house. The boundaries that once separated our lives have become increasingly blurred. Perhaps that's why so many people today speak about feeling as though they are always at work, or that they can never truly switch off. Physically, they've crossed the threshold. Mentally, they never arrived. Anthropologists have often observed that rituals don't exist because people are irrational. They exist because transitions are difficult. A ritual gives the mind permission to change states, to leave one role behind and enter another. Think about graduation ceremonies, a wedding procession, the moment a judge enters a courtroom and everyone stands. None of these actions are strictly necessary. The change has already happened. The degree has been earned. The marriage certificate has been signed. The judge was already a judge before entering the room, and yet, without the ritual, the transformation feels incomplete. The ceremony gives shape to something invisible. Perhaps our ancestors understood this instinctively. A doorway wasn't sacred because spirits literally gathered there, it was sacred because every crossing asked something of the person making it. Leave your anger outside, enter with respect, become a guest, a host, a husband, a parent, become someone new. The threshold became a place where identity could catch up with reality, a single step to allow the mind to say, I'm here now. Today, we still create these moments, we just don't always recognize them. The deep breath before opening the door to a hospital room, the hesitation before walking into a job interview, the quiet moment before unlocking the front door after a funeral. These aren't habits we've been taught. They're deeply human responses to crossing into places where we know something is about to change. Perhaps we never truly stopped treating thresholds as sacred. We've simply forgotten why they always felt different. The next time you stand in a doorway, don't look at the door. Look at the line beneath your feet. It's one of the smallest spaces you'll ever cross, and one of the most meaningful. For thousands of years, people have blessed it, protected it, decorated it, feared it, and respected it. Not because they worshipped doors, but because they understood something surprisingly profound. Life isn't defined only by where we begin or where we end. It's defined by the moments in between. The step from a stranger to guest, from child to adult, from single to married, from the world outside to the place we call home. Even our greatest transitions are marked this way. We cross into schools, across stages, through temple gates. Again and again, our lives move forward, one threshold at a time. Perhaps that's why almost every culture, no matter how different its language, religion, or history, came to treat doorways with such care. Because a threshold isn't simply part of a building, it's a visible shape of an invisible change. It reminds us that transformation rarely happens all at once. It happens in a single step, in a single breath, in a single decision to leave one world behind and enter another. Perhaps that's why we still hesitate before certain doors. Nothing supernatural waits beyond them, and yet we know we'll be different after we walk through. The doorway hasn't changed, we have. Anthropologists gave this feeling a name, liminality. But long before anyone studied it, people simply lived it. They marked their thresholds with prayers, symbols, flowers, iron, and blessings. Not because they feared the doorway itself, but because they respected what it represented. The ancient Romans imagined a god with two faces watching every entrance. Families across the world still decorate their front doors during festivals. People still remove their shoes before entering a home. We still knock before crossing into someone else's space. The customs have changed, the instinct hasn't, because every doorway quietly asks the same question: who are you leaving behind, and who are you about to become? Perhaps that is why the humble threshold has endured as one of humanity's oldest sacred spaces. Not because it belongs to the room behind it or the world beyond it, but because for one brief moment it belongs to both. And maybe that's why humans have always found meaning in places like these. Because sometimes the most important place in the world isn't where we're coming from or where you're going, it's a place where you choose to cross. Tomorrow, you'll probably walk through dozens of doorways: the front door of your home, the entrance to a shop, the office, a train, an elevator. Most of them you won't even remember, but for thousands of years, people believed that every one of those crossings mattered. Not because a doorway possessed magic, but because it reminded us of something we so easily forget. Life is not made only of destination, it is made of passages, of quiet moments when one chapter closes and another begins. Perhaps that's why every culture found its own way to honor the threshold. Different rituals, same understanding that there is meaning in the moment between. Perhaps that's also why some doorways stay with us forever. The front door you closed for the last time after saying goodbye to someone you loved. Years later, we rarely remember the door itself. We remember the person who walked through it, because the threshold was never about architecture, it was about transformation. We quietly witness the moments that divided our lives into before and after. Maybe that's what humans have always sensed, that the spaces between worlds are where our stories change. And perhaps every time you pause before opening a door, you're taking part in one of humanity's oldest rituals, not a ritual of superstition, but of possibility. A quiet acknowledgement that beyond every threshold, there is always the chance to enter a different life. The object itself was never the point. The object was a way of talking about something larger, a fear, a belief, a part of being human that is difficult to describe directly. And that may be why these stories survive. Because long after the original meaning is forgotten, the questions remain. Why do humans keep seeing themselves in things? Thank you for joining me between worlds. Until next time, stay curious.